Hello, and welcome to this month's Rights in Russia interview. It is September 28th, 2023, and today our guest is Sergei Nikitin, who formerly headed Amnesty International Moscow office. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
You're originally from Gatchina, near St. Petersburg, and you studied physics and of semiconductors at the Leningrad Polytechnic Institute, and have worked at research institutes in Leningrad and Gatchina. You've had many occupations, some scientific, others artistic or humanitarian. Worked in museums and on old Russian estates as a painter-decorator for a Leningrad restoration organization. In 1999, Sergei took up the position of director of the international Quaker organization, Friends House Moscow. From 2003, and then for the next 14 years, he worked as the head of Amnesty International's representative office in Russia. Sergei has been involved in historical research work on the theme of Quakers and Russia since 1996, and in 2022 published the book Friends and Comrades, How Quakers Helped Russians Survive Famine and Epidemic. In 2017, Sergei retired and moved to the UK. He is passionate about the Beatles and says that he originally learned English from the songs of the Fab Four. Welcome to Rights in Russia, Sergei Nikitin.
Oh.
So, you headed the Moscow office of Amnesty International from 2003 until 2017. What changes did you see over those 14 years?
I've given quite a few presentations on human rights and specifically amnesty work in Russia recently. So last years I prepared lots of PowerPoint presentation, and in my talks I normally divide that period of my work for Amnesty into two chunks. So the first one I would describe roughly, it starts, well, from the 2003 when I joined Amnesty, and it went until the beginning of 2012. That's what I call vegetarian period, when we could communicate with the authorities, when we were interviewed by the state media. And the second period, which was far worse, it started from 2012 until my retirement in 2017. As I said, the first period when we had no troubles in holding street actions in front of the British embassy, American embassy, Uzbek embassy, no troubles at all, and we could communicate with the authorities. I had a meeting with the Minister of Interior because I had this plan of organizing the special courses on human rights at police academies. So I met with the Russian Minister of Interior, trying to persuade him that it's a good thing, and he was listened to me, and he asked for the book which we had just translated, called Understanding Policing. It was about police and human rights. So human rights education, media work, advocacy, activism, it was possible. After 2012, it was more difficult, but the things were definitely getting worse. It all started, I would say, in 2012 with the Foreign Agents Law.
Mm-hmm. And when you stepped down from the position in 2017, did you predict what would happen in Russia in the coming years, including, say, the war against Ukraine? Did you have any sense that things were going to go in that direction so quickly?
Well, from my opinion, to be accurate, the war with Ukraine began in 2014. And that I was at Amnesty at the time. We published quite a few reports about this kind of hidden war, what was happening in Donbass and Luhansk area, and also annexation of Crimea. But certainly it was pretty clear to me at the time, by the end of my work in Moscow, that the situation is going to be worse. But neither I nor anyone else could predict that Putin would invade and there would be what I call full-scale invasion into Ukraine. And I thought that Kremlin, my perception, my kind of feeling was that the Russian authorities are going to put more pressure on the opposition inside the country. So I thought that the Kremlin would hit the internal opposition. There would be protests and violent reaction from the state to those protesting. But I was wrong, as many other people who were trying to predict what was going to happen. So not to that extent. I did anticipate bad things to happen, but not to that extent.
Mm-hmm. And is Amnesty currently able to work in Russia?
Just to remind that Amnesty International office, which I left in 2017, it was closed down in the beginning of April 2022. So after 5 years since my retirement, it was closed down by the Russian Ministry of Justice with no explanation, and simultaneously the Human Rights Watch office was also closed down. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Friedrich Neumann Foundation for Freedom, many other organizations. So the explanation was very laconic from the state. The Kremlin says that in connection with the discovered violation of the Russian legislation, and that was it. So the Moscow office staff, they left Moscow, they left country, and I think, as far as I know, they are split. Some of them are working in Central Asia, some are working from Europe. So there's no possibility to work for the Amnesty people to work in the fields. I mean, in Russian Federation, but they continue doing the research. I don't know how they do it. Definitely, there's no way there could be any amnesty activism in Russia, of course, and this is what we had in the past. And I'm not sure about letter writing, because you would think twice if you would decide to follow the Amnesty's call to write letters to the Russian authorities. Well, I would imagine that people in Russia might be cautious with these, what we call, urgent actions. So things are not very easy for Amnesty, and physically they are not within the country.
Mm-hmm. And the human rights situation more generally in Russia, how would you describe that now?
I think, well, I have already mentioned it, that we have been witnessing steady decline over the past 2 decades in general. And if we're talking about the human rights at the moment, they're significantly deteriorated since the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, so from February 2022. Specifically, I would mention that things are terrible. We're talking about restrictive legislation, which targeting civil society, like the Foreign Agents Law I mentioned, the new legislation on undesirable organization. It was, I think it went in force in 2015, the undesirable organization, but it was heavily applied just recently. Then the new laws, after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the new laws on fake news and also on discrediting the Russian army. Also, lots of troubles for the people from LGBTQI community. Also, challenges in things like freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, censorship, control of media, shutdown of independent media organizations, silencing journalists, all kind of things. Then no chances for any peaceful assembly. So the freedom of peaceful assembly no longer exists. Freedom of association, it's not there as well. We are talking about forced closure of human rights organizations, the treatment of political opposition, well, we know that Navalny has been imprisoned and he's going to serve the next 19 years in prison, and no rule of law whatsoever, and no fair trials. And what is even worse, we are witnessing persecution of lawyers. So the list is very long, and there's nothing good I can talk about human rights in Russia at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So could you tell us a bit about your book, how Quakers helped Russians survive famine and epidemic? What led you to choose that topic, and what did you find? Could you just talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, I've been doing this research quite a long time ago. Started in 1990s. I was at a Quaker social project here in England at the time, and I was talking to someone who was a kind of a historian, and he said that, did you know that Quakers did the relief work in Russia and the Soviet Union? I said, no idea. So the guy told me that was the kind of spark. And I just was out of curiosity, I decided to find out. So I'm not a historian myself, but I decided to go to the archives in Russia first, and then I went to American archives. I spent 3 months in Philadelphia. I also went to the British archives here in London. So eventually the whole picture was kind of growing, and I was really impressed. So the Quaker relief work in Russia started in 1916. So that was the Tsar, so that was the Russian Empire at the time. And it was, with a very brief break, it went through until 1931, when the Quaker office in Moscow was closed down. That was the last religious organization office, which was closed down by the Bolsheviks. So I was impressed with the story of cooperation between pacifist religious organization and the state, or communist state, or atheist state. And when I was doing my research, I was reading lots of documents, correspondence, letters. I even traveled to the place where Quakers used to work 100 years ago. That's a town called Buzulu. I talked to elderly people. I was lucky to be there in 1990s, where those who survived the famine with the help of Quakers, they were still alive at the time. So I just approached people in the street and the marketplaces and talked to them. And that was quite an eye-opener on that history, which was not neither to me nor to locals. I went to a local museum, they didn't know about it. So the story of what I also call citizen diplomacy, because Quakers, there was a Quaker unit, there were like a couple of dozen of Quakers from Britain and the United States working, and that in the middle of nowhere. It's a small town, and they were working in the villages as well, and they had to communicate with locals. The Quakers mostly didn't speak any Russian, and of course the Russian peasants are not fluent in English. So that was but they managed, and this cooperation, and we still see the result of it, because quite a lot of people, they still alive because they great grandparents were saved by these Americans and British people. So that's, you can't pass by this kind of interesting stories. So I'm still doing more and more research, because the more you read, the more new horizons open in front of you. So it's exciting.
And so is the book relevant to what is happening in Russia today?
Yes, I think the book is relevant, because in addition to the book you have mentioned, I have already written 2 other books, actually 3 books. All of them are under one cover. And these are 3 stories about a Quaker from the United States, an American Quaker, a British doctor who was not a Quaker, but he worked in Russia in 1922, 100 years ago. And the third person is an Irish Quaker, a lady Quaker from Ireland. And when I was thinking, so that's individual stories of them working in Russia, what they were doing. Each story is quite fascinating. So when I was thinking about how to call the whole book, I just recalled this law on undesirable organizations. And I decided that I should call the book Desirable Foreigners. That's how I call it. So it was in Russia. And I managed to print it, to publish it. Well, the publisher, which had printed my previous book, the state, well, the Moscow publisher, Независимое литературное обозрение, they read the manuscript, and I suspect that they just were not very cautious, and they said, well, we're not prepared to publish it. Okay, so these days we still have the chance of publication at our own expenses. So I, with the help of friends, I I raised some funds for printing costs and distribution through the crowdfunding platform. It is still possible in Russia.
Yeah.
And we managed to get enough money to book being printed, and there was a significant interest. So people who would contribute their money, they would get a copy of the book once it is printed. And the major idea was that the book should be sent to the places where Quakers used to work for free. We were aiming to send it to the libraries, to the museums, to the archives, to the local historians, and we were quite successful with that. And I know that the book was warmly received by these institutions and individuals, because that part of the history which had been hidden from them, people living there, they had no idea who was their savers 100 years ago, who saved from the death from starvation. So this is the answer to your question, whether it was relevant or not. I think it is relevant, and I received quite a lot of feedback from my readers. They say that it's very interesting, it's very important, very useful, and they are eager to learn more. So I have plenty of names, and I can write more stories like that, and there seem to be some demand for this kind of literature. And we're talking about just ordinary people. That's how we work. We are not appealing to the local authorities. We just work directly with people, and it works. Again, it's citizen diplomacy. So it's just, I think it contributes to change in the whole. It's not significantly changed. I mean, I'm not working for the whole country. It's just for this small part of the Russian Federation, which is in Orenburg Oblast at the moment, the town Buzuluk and the small towns and villages nearby. It's important to break this policy, the state policy of hate towards foreigners. That's why I called the book Desirable Foreigners. So my intention is, first of all, to show that we are not going to divide the world into us and them, Russians and non-Russians, foreigners and locals. No, we are talking about humanity, about human beings, and it doesn't matter what language the person speaks. It's just what they do matters. And these are examples of good things they did in the past, without any obvious profit. It's just because they wanted to help those who are starving. They wanted to feed you, they wanted to cure you, and here is the story. So it's just, to create the real picture what it was when you had a chance to communicate with foreigners directly without this terrible propaganda which we are witnessing now. So I'm trying to break the barrier. I do what I can.
Yes. I have a question about media in general. I mean, you talked about, the persecution of journalists and the closing down of media outlets. And so many Russian media outlets have moved outside Russia, but continue to report and analyze events in Russian. And I'm wondering if you could say anything about the extent to which this reporting reaches audiences inside Russia now.
Well, it's a question which probably you'd better ask those who live in Russia. As I no longer live in Russia, I'm probably not the best person to answer. But my feeling is that, because I'm communicating with people who are still there, and I'm very cautious when I
Yeah.
communicate with them. Say, even communication via messengers like WhatsApp might not be safe for them, because it did happen in the past that police would stop people in the street and check their smartphones just to make sure that there is no kind of suspicion dialogues. But what I understand that there's a kind of a division in society, if you wish. There are people who are interested and they want to know what is happening in the bigger world. If they want to find another opinion different from the state opinion, they can easily find it. And the good thing that all these journalists who are abroad, they provide all kind of opinions. You can listen to them on YouTube, or you can subscribe to their public social networks. So it is there if you want to know. But unfortunately, there are quite a lot of people who are not prepared. They're not interested. They kind of live in a shell, and they're, to me, it looks like they're hiding their heads in the sand, and they just, the state propaganda is enough for them. So they don't want to listen to, and they might be even not prepared to find out the news which are not so pleasant for them. So that's a sociological issue. So these people would not even be interested in trying to find alternative sources of information.
Yeah. People in Western countries often ask what they might do to help Russian political prisoners. And what would you say to them?
When I was in Amnesty, what I liked in Amnesty particularly was the letter writing, and there was an event which happened more or less the same time every year, somewhere in November and December. It was called Letter Writing Marathon. So people would write letters to prisoners of conscience in many countries. And when I moved to England, I joined the local Amnesty group. And again, I like this bit of Amnesty work. I encouraged my group to write letters to people serving their terms in Russian prisons. But that was before the war. And we no longer have the Amnesty group here, because it's just the process that Amnesty groups are dying out, not only in England, but all over the world as well. Anyway, writing letters, that's what I think is very important, because in the past, I talked to many people who had been released from the prison, and they were sharing with me their feelings, what they felt when they would receive letters from the compatriots from within country or from abroad. They said that they would decorate the prison cell with these postcards from distant countries, and that was a great, joy for them to feel this kind of international support. So my feeling is that these days, when you cannot write in English or any other language to the prisoners in Russia, because of the regulation, the rules are very strict. The censorship demands that all the letters are to be done in Russian language. My dream is of creation of a platform which would help non-Russian speaking people who are willing to support, to send a postcard to this or that prisoner of conscience or political prisoner in Russia with the help of this platform. And that's what I think they kind of, on one hand, it's so easy to send a letter, to drop a line in the postcard and to buy a post stamp and send it to Russia. But on the other hand, it's so important for the people who would receive these postcards. And I think that's one of the things which could be possibly done by Western society.
That's a creative idea, and I think it would be welcomed by many people. So looking back, What do you think might have been done differently for human rights to be better protected in Russia today? Was there anything that might have been done differently that could have made a difference in what's happening now?
Well, when I was working for Amnesty and I had a chance to meet with many diplomats, I was a frequent visitor to many embassies in the capital of Russian Federation. And whenever I talk to the foreign diplomats, I always keep on saying that, look, you are losing this kind of informational competition or informational war, whatever you call it. And what I was saying is that, say, if I go to my hometown of Gatchina and switch on TV, there's no way I can get connected. I can watch the programs of CNN, BBC, Deutsche Welle, Radio France, whatever, because they've been closed down by the Russian authorities at the time. It was just Euronews, a very kind of neutral and not really impressing news program. But at the same time, Russia enjoyed freedom of expression, and the Russia Today channel was everywhere. I remember my wife and I, we went to a remote place in somewhere in North Wales, and there was a small TV there with just 3 or 4 channels. I switched it on, and the first channel was Russia Today. So I was keep on saying, how come you losing this informational? I don't like the word war, but that was like a war.
Mm-hmm.
And Russian people have no access to the Western media. There's no chance that they can have another opinion. And at the same time, you had no troubles with giving these chances to the Russia Today. You can easily, set up some kind of conditions under which Russia Today could broadcast their programs in your country, saying that just in response, you give us the permission to broadcast BBC and CNN, but or Voice of America. But they kind of didn't take it seriously. And I think to a great extent, this is one of the bad things that that resulted in general people ignorance in what is happening, because many generations in Russia they didn't have access to the Western media, and the West decided that after the Cold War is over, there's no reason to waste resources on Voice of America and BBC, and the financial side was shrinking, and that's a result. People were short of information, and this could have been done differently. And I think the fact that Russian media has a chance to speak out to Russian audience from the Western countries is great, but I understand that they also have difficulties like this TV channel Rain. They were closed down in Latvia. Sadly, they had to move to the Netherlands. So media is an important thing, and we should definitely look more attentively on support of the media which is broadcasting over Russia.
Mm-hmm. Looking ahead, how do you see Russia's future and the future of human rights?
Talking about the future and the future of human rights, my feeling is that the perspectives are pretty gloomy, and it's going to be probably even worse compared to what we have at the moment when we're talking about human rights in Russia. And it will go like that until the end of the war, until the time when Ukraine would expel Russian troops from its territories, and until the time when the war criminals will be taken to the tribunals. And I don't know when it's going to happen, hopefully before too long. Hopefully we will survive to see it. But until then, my hopes are very low.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've we've come to the end of our time, and this has been a very rich discussion, with ending on a somewhat gloomy note, but with a few elements of hope. I think your letter writing platform concept is a great one, and we look forward to hearing more about how that's progressing. We're just very grateful that you could spend this time with us and share your perspectives given your deep experience and long activism in Russia. Many thanks, Sergei Nikitin.
Thank you. Pleasure.